Good morning, everybody. It's Chris van die Kerk here at Blue Rhino Safaris. I have had a few questions about the sizing of your power systems at your camp. Obviously, we go and tour quite a lot, and we have fridges and freezers and inverters and all kinds of things running on our systems. And one of the most common noises is that little beep, beep, beep in the morning of a dead battery. And it's something that happens on day 2, day 3, day 4. So people ask me, well, how do we do this? How do we size a battery system or a split charge system or a system on our vehicles? And what do we do to make this thing work for us? So I decided to do a quick video with just a PowerPoint or keynote presentation to show you what the principles are and how you would go about in determining what's required for a system that you use. So how do you size a camping system? Now, you need to understand that there's 3 basic components of a system. The first is the components that will be adding power into your system. In this case, it's the solar panel, the alternator in the middle, and then the 220-volt charger at the bottom. You have your components that remove power from your system. Your fridges, your laptop, iPad, charger, phone, camera, those type of things, and then also the lights that you use in the evening. Those are the main things that draws power. Let's ignore the inverters and microwaves and those things for now. And then the last component of the 3 would be your battery that provides the storage. At night there's no sun, you're not driving, and if you're in the bush there's no 220 volts, so you need to get power from somewhere, and that somewhere would be a battery. So if you're adding power into your system with the absence of drawing power, then it means your batteries are busy charging up. So your storage becomes better. If you are removing power without adding power, at night for example, your battery is now obviously running down. So you're going to lose the storage of your battery. If you have continuous running in a system like you're camping for 10 days out in the bush, it means you're continuously adding power and removing power. And it means that the whole thing needs to be in a sort of a balance. And you want to get to the balance of what you are doing. So let's start on the power generator side. Firstly, you have solar panels. Now, it's very common these days to see everybody breaking out their solar panels when we stop for a day. And it's a good thing. Definitely not a bad thing, but remember the following: a solar panel only produces power with direct sun, not light, or there's clouds but there's a lot of light, or we just sort of put it in the shady area but there's enough light. Doesn't work. It must be direct sun. The best power is when the sun is at 90 degrees on the panel, so it shines exactly 90 degrees on the panel, not at an angle. So if it's lying flat and it's 10 o'clock in the morning, then you have an angle and you lose a lot of the efficiency. If a portion of the panel is in the shade, you lose a lot of the panel's output capacity. And I'm talking about 75%. If just a corner of the panel is shaded, so the tree throws a bit of shade just on the corner of the panel, that dead cell means that the whole panel basically drops. So you have to keep the whole panel in the sun at all times. The effective sun for the day is about 6.5 hours. That is in a decent summer in South Africa. In winter it drops to about 5.8. It all depends where on the planet you are, how much sunlight you have during the day that you can use. So if you look at 6.5 hours, it tells you that the best sun that you're going to get is going to be roughly from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. That is about the best sun that you're going to get. And that's when you are on the road. So it's always difficult to put solar panels out when you're driving, unless you mount them on top of your vehicle. The sun at altitude is better at coastal. Coastal regions have a very dense atmosphere, and you lose about 10% dropping down to the coastal areas just in the performance of the panels. So if you're at altitude, up here in the Highveld, we have great suns. Up in Uppington area, there's no moisture in the air. Very, very good sun. And then the power is managed and limited by the controller. Your controller is the little piece of equipment that manages the voltage that the panel produces. The panel with open circuit produces maybe 20-25 volts, which is too much for your battery. So you need something to reduce the voltage and then put the power out. And that thing limits the amount of power that goes through. So be careful of the controller that you pick. It must not be too small. An example for solar panels. You're camping next to the river in the Highveld. You have panels out for the day. Your brand new 180 watt fold-up panels that you purchased. Nice super duper deluxe stuff. It's a blue sky day. No trees around. You moving the panels all day long, and you're basically the panel manager for the day. It's the best case scenario that you can have. You'll never get that in the bush. And for that, you're looking at 1,170 watts for the day. At 12 volt gives you 97 amp hours with a 180 watt panel. So that's brilliant. This is now, I bought my panels 180 watts and I'm expecting to get my 180 watts worth for the day. Alternatively, you're camping in Kruger Park with the same panels. You're close to the trees, it's a cloudy day, it's bright but not blue sky. Your foldable panel is not exactly flat, it's sort of hanging skew on the one side, and you leave for a game drive on the day, so you're not managing your panel. You left it flat, so you're expecting something good, but your efficiency drops for 10% just because you're in Kruger rather than on the Highveld. You have an efficiency drop of 10% with the atmosphere. You're not moving the panel, but you lay it flat. You still lose 30% because of the fact that the angle of the sun is not constantly 90 degrees all day long. It at some point it's there, but the rest of the time it's not. So you lose about 30%. It was cloudy while you were out for about 2 hours of the time that you had left, and you lost even more. And you end up with 508 watts for the day, and then there was a bit of shade on the corner for one of those hours, and you lost a little bit more. And the power you generated on that day, 35 amp hours. Now, if you look at 97 that is optimal versus 35 that you actually got, it's a very big difference. Now, if you have to pick your solar panel and the guy says, well, what do you need? And you say, well, I calculated my fridges needs 100 amp hours for the day that I need to generate with the solar panel. They'll say, well, we've got this 100 amp hour panel, it's perfect for you, you can take it. It's 180 watts and it's the best thing since sliced bread. You're going to end up utilizing only about 30 to 50% of that. So you need to double up just to make sure that you have enough power. So remember, the best case scenario is almost never an option. Don't go for this thing is always going to perform at its best. Kruger, cloudy day, shade, dust, panels not lying perfectly flat. It's all going to reduce your power. So don't assume the best conditions. As a safe guide, double up on what you think your solar requirements would be. The second generator would be the alternator of a vehicle, but it only produces power when you're driving. The modern vehicles have smart alternators. Now these things switches on and off as the power in the vehicle is required, and be careful of that. If you have a modern vehicle with a smart alternator, you need a charger that can charge from a smart alternator. The output of the alternator is dependent on the demand from the battery. If the battery is not demanding anything, then the alternator is not going to push any power out. So it makes the charging not as efficient as you would get with a different charger. Output voltage is determined by the vehicle power demand. Vehicles are restricted in the power that they can produce, the voltage, based on the electronics in the vehicle. They cannot produce a 14.4 volt for a lithium battery on an alternator through your car system, because it will pop your LED screen and all the lights and gauges on the vehicle will blow because the voltage is too high. So the output voltage is determined by the vehicle manufacturer. So you have to keep that in mind. If you want to alter that, you have to take that current and put it through a type of a charging system that will charge something else. If you only rely on the battery voltage, you're going to be stuck on what the vehicle manufacturer is doing. So if you use a solenoid, for example, then that solenoid cannot step up the voltage. It can only give you what the vehicle is producing. And most vehicles and alternators are set up for lead acid batteries, so they don't take lithium into consideration at all. Let's look at an example. If you're touring with Blue Rhino and we're sleeping somewhere in Kagalagadi, you have a solenoid and a dual battery system. The solenoid has a timer in it to prevent this thing from kicking in and out all the time. It's a standard design on them. We leave 8 o'clock in the morning, we drive for 2 hours, coffee, 2 hours, lunch, 2 hours, and then back to camp at 4 o'clock. So we had 6 hours driving for the day. But we had some wildlife on the road, so 6 became 5 hours of driving. The solenoid kicked out 3 times in every hour. Switching off the vehicle, solenoid kicks out, start the vehicle, move on to the next game sighting. And you lose another almost an hour just with that timer of the solenoid that it takes to kick in and out. You end up only with 4 hours and 10 minutes. With the average charge on an alternator, which is between 10 and 20 amps, so say 15 amps, your total charge for the day was 62. If we look at the 220 volt power generator, now going back, that 62 was about double what you got from the panel, so that was still a reasonable charge. Moving on to the 220 volt charger, 220 is not available everywhere. In Nosop, the generator kicks off at night and there is no 220 volt. So when you're traveling, be careful of voltage stability and power spikes. If you're running your rest of your kit on 220 volt, be careful of power spikes. Power charge is limited by the size of your charger. If you decide to buy a small charger because it's cheaper, it is smaller. Remember that. You need extension cables because the plug point might be a mile away and you need to run extensions all the way from there. If Nosop's generator kicks off at 10 o'clock at night, that's it. There's no more 220 volt available. Intelligent chargers are also useful because they can maintain your battery. When your battery is sitting at home, it will deteriorate because you are not maintaining it or not using it. And the best thing is to put an intelligent charger on top of on the battery, so that it detects whenever the battery drops a little bit, it will give it a charge and it will just keep it full. That will extend the life of your battery. Let's look at an example. You purchased a rather expensive 220 volt intelligent charger. You took the 5 amp because the 10 was just crazy expensive, so you have the 5 amp. You arrive back from the game drive in Nosop and you plug your charger into the power at 5 in the evening. 10 o'clock the generator kicks out, and 6 o'clock you unplug because you're going for a game drive to the water hole to look at the jackal catching the doves in the morning. So that gave you 25 amp hours for the night. So you had a 35 from solar, you had a 62 from driving, and you had a 25 from the 5 amp charger. It gives you 122 amp hours, which is good because you utilized solar, driving, and also your 220 volt. But remember, solar and driving you can only do together if you have a solar panel on the vehicle. Otherwise you have to pick one of the two. So there's one of your first issues. Let's look at the power consumers. Fridges by far have the highest demand of anything. Fridges will eat the battery for breakfast. It has a continuous demand, it doesn't stop. If you switch a light on and off, the light's on and it's consuming power, you switch it off and you're saving power. Once you leave your home with your fridge, you are pretty much committed to keep that fridge running. Otherwise your food is going to spoil. So it's got a continuous demand. It doesn't stop. It doesn't give the battery a break. The demand changes based on how the fridge is used. So if you are opening, closing, in and out all the time, then you're going to use more power. It changes based on how it is set. If you set it to minus 30 degrees to freeze your whiskey ice, it is going to use a lot more power than the one that is just keeping your food in a slush condition for the week that you are out there. The demand changes based on how it's built. If you have a cheap plastic fridge with poor insulation, then it's going to use more power. If you have a decent freezer that has thick insulation, then it will use less power. Now, in one brand, you can get different versions. The National Luno brands, the Weekenders, have a thinner wall to give you more space for the same footprint. So they are not as efficient as their thick wall fridges. And there's a difference. And you have to pick the one that's going to work best for you. The demand changes based on where it's installed. In the back of the bakkie where it's hot and the fridge have no space to breathe, it's going to work a lot harder than sitting on the back seat of the vehicle in the air-con car. So where it's installed makes a difference. It's based on the season. If at night it's very cold or you're in Lesotho, fridges don't work at night because it's just so cold that the fridge can just switch off for the night. It doesn't have to do anything. But if you're in Botswana in December, at night those fridges are going to run and they're going to keep running. So they're going to chow power all night long. So if you're going on holiday in December and you're going to northern Mozambique on the coast in Pemba and it's 40 degrees at night, believe me, the fridges are going to work. Fridges can run a battery to destruction. If you leave a fridge on, especially the old Engels that didn't cut out, then that fridge will run until the battery says I have nothing left, and that battery is basically destroyed. It also makes a difference how many fridges you have. I have a big 90 liter, I've got a 60 liter, and I've got a 19 liter. If I run all three fridges together, my battery system sees three fridges. It doesn't see a big and a small, it sees three fridges. And I eat a lot of power with my fridges when I run like that. So let's look at an example. You're in Kruger, it's always nice and warm, so obviously you want a cold beer and some ice for the GNTs. And you set your freezer at minus 15 just to get the ice sorted out during the night, otherwise you don't have ice next night for the GNT. The outside temperature is the high 20s, 28, 29, 30ish, and it gives you a delta T, the difference between inside the fridge and outside, delta T of 35 degrees. The fridge draw is about 70 watts while it's running, and it runs for 50 minutes an hour, for example. So you use about 58 watts or 5 amp hours for a 24-hour cycle, which means 120 amp hours. So remember that 120 something that we generated? This is what this fridge consumes because I'm making ice. You have a second similar, a smaller fridge that holds cold drinks for the car, but you only run it on cigarette lighter and it only runs when you start the car. That one has no effect on your battery system because it only runs off the alternator when the vehicle is running. So you can ignore that one. The first fridge draw is 70 watts and it runs for 50 minutes to the hour, so 120 amp hours consumed. If I run that second little fridge on my battery system, I have 43 amps that I have to add. And now my fridge consumption goes to 163, and suddenly the power that I generated with my solar and driving and little 5 amp charger is not enough anymore. The second set of power consumers are your laptops and cameras. Laptops are power eaters. They do take a lot of power when they are running. iPads, they can take about 6 amp hours of your battery life if you charge a iPad. Phones and cameras are less users, but generally I prefer to charge these items on 220 volt. 220 volt is a lot more efficient in charging. So check when you have 220 volt available and charge your equipment rather on 220 when it's there. If you plug it in on your batteries, it is going to have an effect on the battery. As an example, you're downloading and editing photos on your laptop. It takes about 4 amp hours. Then you charge your iPad for the night, your phone and your camera. Make sure everything is ready for the next day. That takes another 4 amp hours. And you end up with 8 amp hours, which is about 15% of a 105 battery that you can actually consume. The last of the consumers, camping lights. It is the smallest consumer, but it can be a big consumer. Don't be fooled by them or leave them on and think it doesn't draw any power. The more lights you have, the more power it consumes. LEDs are low consumers, but they are very harsh on your eyes. I do not like a LED light in camp. To me, they hurt my eyes, and it takes the peacefulness of nature away when you have these harsh white LED lights. So try and go for the softer ones, the tube lights. Leave the LEDs off or put a nice diffuser on them so that they are not as bright and they don't hurt your eye as much. You can run your lights off your main crank battery because they do not take that much power, and you're not going to run down your battery through the night unless you keep a light on. So if you have one camping light, you can run it off your main battery and sort of save your camping battery. As an example, you have a nice 30-watt camping light that you run for 4 hours in the evening. That will take about 10 amp hours out of your battery. You have another light that you want to leave on for safety's sake, and it's a little 15 watts, so it doesn't consume that much. But 15 watts is 1.25 amp hours for a 12-hour night. Gives you 15 amps. 15 amps out of your battery just for leaving a light on for no real reason. So your total lights, in this case, the two lights that you have, 25 amp hours. So if I look at my consumption at night, I'm in camp at 4 in the evening, so I stop driving, and tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock we are out again. Fridge running at -15, our fridge that we discussed just now, gives me 80 amp hours that it will consume. Let's assume the small fridge is not on your second battery. You're charging your cameras, working your laptop, that's 8 amps for the night. Your lights plus your night through the light, 25 amps. Your total consumption for the night, 130 amp hours. Now, if you have a little 5 amp charger which is running at NOSOP for the 4 or 5 hours, let's say you're going to get 20 amps out of that. If I deduct the two from each other, it means my capacity that I need at night is 93 amp hours. That's not coming from driving, it's not coming from solar. 220 has already been deducted. So 93 has to be produced by a battery. And this is where the poor battery comes into play. They are always to blame for all problems that you have on a camping trip. So let's go through them first. Lead acid batteries resist charging. When you put a big charge into lead acid, they do not want it. So they resist it, and they are very slow to charge. Lead acid batteries resist consumption. As soon as you start drawing big power out of lead acid, they resist it and they just fake small. So they make 105 would make itself look like a 60, and suddenly nothing wants to work anymore. Lead acid batteries are not good for what we are doing, but it's cheap and common. If we camp, we are pretty much abusing batteries. That's how we operate with batteries on a camping trip. But they're cheap, they're common, and they can fulfill the role for us. So if you have to replace them every 2 or 3 years, then that's just the way it is. They are not too expensive. If you have more than one battery in your system, so you decided to put 2 batteries because you need to, but the one is a 3-year-old battery, sort of at its end of its life, and the other one's brand new, the battery system will mimic the worst of the lot. So it will always find the worst battery and say, well, this is what we are. So be careful, don't mix old and new batteries. Lead acid batteries are very heavy, and as I said, we abuse them when we go out on trips. Expected battery life. All battery life expectancies are expressed in cycles. Cycle is a discharge and a recharge cycle, and you can generally look at it in a day. It will charge during the day, discharge at night, charge in the day, and so you go through the cycles. And every cycle is generally a day. It's not 100% correct, but it gives you a good idea. So a battery with a life expectancy of 365 cycles would be good for 1 year. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but that's more or less what you're looking at. The amount of cycles are based on the depth of discharge. So the deeper you discharge your battery, so you use 80% of its capacity, if you do that a lot of time, you will reduce the number of cycles that battery will give you. If a battery is always full and you just use a little bit at the top, the battery will give you a long life, many cycles, because you're hardly using it. And that is the difference between the two. So if I look at a high cycle crank style battery, the battery is not supposed to be drained, and you'll destroy it when you start running your camping gear on it. So if you run camping gear on your crank battery of your vehicle, you're going to destroy it pretty quickly. The architecture inside of the battery is not designed for discharging it. It's there to crank a car and go. It's not supposed to be discharging. A small drain of 10 amps is probably not a problem. So that light that was running for 4 hours during the night gives us 10 amp hours. That's fine. That's not going to make a big difference. But if you start dropping the capacity to 50%, like you put the fridge on and you run the fridge on your crank battery and you forgot to take it out at night, that fridge can destroy your crank battery during the night. So let's look at a semi-deep cycle. The word semi-deep cycle and deep cycle is just the way people express it. True deep cycle batteries would be your lithium batteries that can go to 100% discharge, back up again, deep discharge. Semi-deep cycles are ones that they don't really want to go below 50%, but it doesn't mind getting to 50%. So that would be your semi-deep cycles. In this case, we have 105 amp hour general use semi-deep cycle. It's one of the known brands out there. You see it in the shops. And if you look at the bottom right, you can see the expected life cycle based on different duty cycles. So if I discharge it to 50%, then I get 290 cycles. 290 cycles, roughly a year. So I'm not doing that every day when I'm camping. When I'm back at home and I look after my battery, put it on an intelligent charger, it means that it might be working for 20 days or 30 days of the year, and the rest of the time I'm keeping it in good shape, so I can stretch my duty cycles quite a little bit because I'm not always reducing it, not every day, down to 50%. So note that the maximum discharge at the bottom of this page is 50%. They don't even go into the I'm discharging it at 80% because that will again just pretty much destroy your battery. So on the right hand top side, you can see if that little sight glass is dark, it means you're between 50 and 70% state of charge. So you're still above the 50. You need to recharge and charge it for 12 hours. So as I said, these batteries do not like to be charged or discharged. They resist it. So you need a long charge to get it back up again. So if you look at the yellow lights that we have on the right hand side, this is often the only reference that guys have. Then a 50% discharge that gives you 290 cycles is 12.2 volts, and it means you've got 3 yellow lights left. Now if you think of your camping days, how many times do you get up in the morning and you have more than 3 yellow lights left? That's the minimum that these guys expect you to do. If you go below the 3 lights, you are already in trouble town. You are busy destroying your battery. If you go to 20% duty cycle, which means you are not dropping it less than 80%, then you're looking at about 3 years life. So that is more or less what you are doing. The more yellow lights you are using through the night, the shorter the life expectancy is, and it is quite dramatic. So when you wake up and it's red blinking, then you know you have trouble. You are damaging the battery in a big way, a normal lead acid battery. Other lead acids, this is off the Victron website. Victron is a very good brand of electronic equipment. Note how the batteries differ. The gel long life on the right hand side, the green one, that is a gel battery that you would be using inside of your house. That's not a battery for vehicle use, so it's not supposed to be ported around, so you can ignore the green one. You would be looking at the gel deep cycle, which is the red one, and then the amalgamated glass mat deep cycle, the AGM battery, the blue one. Now the AGM batteries are typically the stuff that you would find on a gate motor or a garage door or something. Those are the AGMs. They're quite expensive, about 4,500 Rand for a 105 battery. But there you can see again, if I discharge to 80%, then I'm going to look at about 400 cycles, so 1 year, which is good. This is a good quality battery. The AGM is better than just the normal deep cycle lead acids. So AGM will give you better life, but it costs you more. The new batteries that's out on display are the lithium iron phosphate, and Lithium ions are very different. They like to charge. So if you give them a charge, they charge very quickly. They like to discharge. If you short this battery, you can explode the battery. They are so keen on discharging the energy that you can have an explosion. So it's a dangerous battery if you're not careful with it. You don't want to short it out. You want to have proper protection on it, but it does not mind discharging itself quite far down. If you look at the 100% discharge, the cycle life in the center, you can see the cycle life at 100% depth of discharge. This means the battery is gone, dead. It can give no more. It will give you 2000 cycles, or more or less 5 years. And this technology is the same as your cell phone. So you can run your cell phone until it dies, charge it tomorrow, and you're back to running again normally. If you look after your battery with the 50% depth of discharge, you're looking at 5000 cycles or 13 years. Now, I will do a separate video to show you the cost compared to lithium compared to lead acid, and you will see that the current lithium prices are cheaper per kilowatt hour than lead acid. So the capital layout is more on the lithiums, but the price per kilowatt is much better because I can get 13 years out of this thing if I run a 50% depth of discharge. In my vehicle, I have two of these batteries. I only run them down to about 60% capacity at night, so I'm expecting 10 years plus of life on my two batteries. So let's look at the consumption at night. We now have to pick our system. We arrive at 4 in the evening. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock we're leaving again. That's 16 hours. We went through this just now. Total consumption 113 amp hours. But I have a little 5 amp which is running, and that is giving me my 5 amps that from the power. Let's change the consumption to the fridge running at a -7. First instance we had -15. Now let's change that to a -7. It uses about half of the power, so it drops to a 40 amps. Let's assume the small fridge is not running on the second battery. You're not charging cameras at night, but during the day while you're driving, and you're not working on a laptop. You're not running night lights, only the lights around camp until about 10 o'clock. So your total consumption for the night is about 50 amp hours. You still have the 5 amp charger running for the 4 hours, and that gives you an additional 20. So your battery only needs to supply 30 amp hours. So if you have 30 amp hours and you want not to exceed a 40% draw depth of discharge on your batteries, so you want about a 2-year life expectancy, it means that your 30 amp hours is equal to 40%, and your battery then has to be a 75 amp hour. So in this case you need a 75 amp hour, and a 105 battery will do then, for that matter, perfectly fine. So now you've drawn your power from the battery during the night, and you need to recharge your battery during the day. So in example number 1, we needed the 113 amp hours during the night, and during the day you need 40 amp hours to run the fridges, which gives you a total of 153 amp hours. So now running or recharging the battery, I need to look at the evening's consumption, which I need to replace, as well as the running during the day while I'm driving around. And I need to replace the power that I consumed and that I am consuming during the day. So looking at the 24-hour cycle, for example 1, I would need 153 amp hours. And that needs to be generated in this 24-hour cycle. And there you go through the system. It's 1,836 watt hours. I have to times it by 2 to deal with my losses, so it gives me 3,600 watts. And if I'm only replacing this with solar at 6.5 hours for the day, it means I need 564 watt panels. So I need a panel of 564 with a 50 amp controller. This is huge. This is one of the big panels, or two of the big panels with a 50 amp controller. So running on solar only with my -15 ice making machine thing is just not going to work. It is too big for camping. If I'm running on an alternator and 220 volts, we need that 153. We can get that from the alternator driving at 62 amp hours. We saw just now when we calculated our game viewing drive. So 153 minus the 62 leaves you with about 90 amps that you need from your 220 volt charger. And we can manage that if we plug in a 10 amp charger for the night. So a combination of a better alternator charger and a larger 220 volt charger will give you the best chance to cope with that ice making system. That example number 1. If I run only on solar, example number 2, remember we reduced the temperature on the fridge, so it's not -15 anymore, it's only -7. We don't have the night light. We've changed a few things to use less power, and it means what we need to generate in a 24-hour cycle is 70 amp hours or 840 watt hours. That would be 258 watt panel with a 21 amp controller. Much more doable. My vehicle has a 360 watt panel on with a 30 watt controller. So technically on this setup, my vehicle can just stand in the sun and I can run that system for the whole time. I'm not making ice. I'm just keeping my fridges and freezers cold, and I have a light at night. No light through the night, just one for the 4 hours. So if I'm running on an alternator in 220 volt, for example number 2, so I don't have the solar panels. Example number 2, again, the reduced power requirement. The 62 amp hours that we can produce with the alternator is almost good enough to provide for the 70 that I need. I only need 8 amps more, and that's a little 220 volt charger at night wherever I have the opportunity. So in this case, my alternator and 220 volt will be good enough. I don't need solar, and that means I cannot make ice at -15. My freezers are running at -7. So what are the key issues? Don't run the freezers too cold. Place your fridge in a well-ventilated area to keep the delta T down as far as possible. Buy a fridge that is well insulated and a low power consumer. Don't put warm food in the fridge. Use a more efficient connector to your alternator, something without a timer. Your DC to DC chargers generally are direct. As soon as your alternator kicks in, they will charge. So you don't have timer issues with them. Don't restrict your current charging from the alternator. If you put in a DC-DC charger with a 10 amp charge, then the only power that you can get from the alternator is 10 amps. And you're sort of restricting what the alternator can produce for you. Use 220 volt when it's available, and buy a bigger 220 volt charger. Be careful of buying too small on 220. Bigger will give you more flexibility as you go. And that's basically it. So if there's any questions, please let me know. You can go through all of the stuff again to just confirm in your mind how I do the calculations. It is just for illustration purposes. I will do another video to show if a fridge is full versus empty, how much power does it consume. If it's running at -15 versus -7, what is the difference, so that you can get an idea of where to adjust your system. But that is it. There's limitations on your system. You need to understand where those limitations are. And join me on one of my trips. Try this out. I have a spare fridge if you run out of fridge space, or if your battery packs up, then I can help you out. Otherwise, let me know if you have questions and we can have a look at it. Cheers.